Oh, blimey, here we go. Now we're
Recording in progress.
Well, welcome everybody to the September meeting of the Dealey Plaza UK Society. And Jim, very, very welcome to you. Thank you so much for your patience with us. We're sorry about last month, but we're grateful that you were flexible and able to meet us today. And particularly today, because it's a big day in the United States. It's a 20-year anniversary of 9/11.
It is, yes.
That's very much in our thoughts as well. A lot of coverage on TV over here about that, Jim, by the way, TV and radio as well. But we're very grateful that you've given up your time to come and meet us and particularly talk to us about, obviously, you've got a book called Chasing Ghosts. There's been some really unique interviews that you've been able to do as a result of researching for that book. And we're really interested to hear from you. So I'm just going to hand straight over to you, Jim. And thanks again for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Now, I'm going to try to share the screen with my PowerPoint handout and see if that works. Can, I don't know if you can see that or not.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we can see that perfectly, Jim.
Okay, well, let's go ahead then. And I'm open for questions at any time. You know, we can have questions at the end, but anytime I say something during the presentation, just go ahead and let me know. We can talk about it. So I think we're all familiar with the existing resources out there, but I just need to acknowledge that. So I'm going to quickly go over that. We're going to talk about the Warren Commission report, the House Select Committee on Assassinations that took place in the 1970s. And then I'm going to go into my own personal research, the interviews I did. Sam, a Texas businessman I spoke with a few times. Colonel Fletcher Prouty, who I corresponded with for a couple of years. Former CIA directors, William Colby and Richard Helms. And also my FOIA. FOIA is Freedom of Information request, where you can request information from the government. And we'll talk about all those. Just to give you some background on how this started. This started for me back in the 1990s. So I've been at it 25 years. I used to run a mental health center here in Minnesota, and it was pretty stressful. And I would come home at night and I would sit around thinking about my work, and that's not healthy. So I decided to find a hobby, and I looked into a number of things. I couldn't find anything that interested me. And one night, my wife said, that movie JFK is playing at a local theater. It had been out for quite a while. And I thought that might be interesting to go see. Now, I had heard a lot about this. And here in the States, everything you heard about it in newspapers and magazines was negative. They basically said that Oliver Stone was nuts. He made up most of the stuff in the movie. And I thought, well, regardless, I'll go look into it. I did not know much about the assassination at that time. So I went to the movie and I came out of that movie and I said, those people are right, because there was so much stuff that Oliver Stone covered in that movie that I've never heard of. And I thought, if any of that stuff was true, you know, the media would have jumped on it. There would have been some real investigations and we would have gotten to the bottom of it. So I said, you know, this would be a great hobby, and it'll probably take me a month or so. I've been doing it for 25 years. But I thought I would, you know, pretty readily find out that Oswald was the lone assassin, and that, gosh, the government would never lie to us. So I started looking into it. So I read the existing research, started with the Warren Commission. We have a local library that has actually all the volumes, the 20 plus volumes of the Warren Commission report. So I went through those. And my first impression was that everything the critics said about the Warren Commission report was right. It was just a mess. I thought it was, I've taught writing for a number of years. It's like it was written by someone in grammar school. It wasn't very well organized. There was no index, so you couldn't look anything up. You couldn't find anything. So I found that pretty disappointing. After that, I started reading all the books, and we all know there's hundreds of books out there. I probably read about 100 books. And everyone seemed to have their own theory, and they would pull out bits of evidence to support that theory. And that was interesting, but that didn't really satisfy me. Well, then I realized that many people who held positions of power back in the 1960s were still alive. So I set out to contact them. I cast out a really wide net. You know, everybody who held any kind of position of power in the Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, White Houses administrations I contacted. So again, just to conclude with the Warren Commission, they said that Oswald shot JFK, that he acted alone, and oddly enough, they had no motive. And you know, one of the main things when you do a murder investigation is you find out what the person's motive is. They admitted he had no motive. And then at the end of the Warren Commission report, they said that Jack Ruby loved dogs. And I thought, what an odd thing to say about the most important murder investigation in the history of the country. And to me, it was almost like someone was trying to clue you in that there was something wrong with this report. So I'll just go over the basic stuff that we all know here. There's a picture of the school book depository, the arrow where the shots allegedly came from. And there's a picture of the grassy knoll. The arrow might be where some people think the shots came from. So then I drew my conclusions with the Warren report, which are, I'm sure you've all heard these things. Could Oswald have made the shot? We know that he was at best an average shot when he was in the Marine Corps. He failed his shooting test the first time. I corresponded with Ernst Titowitz, who the Warren Commission said was Oswald's best friend in the Soviet Union. And Dr. Titowitz said that he had gone hunting with Oswald. Oswald was a very poor shot. And he didn't seem to think that Oswald committed this crime. Could Oswald be in the lunchroom? Well, we know that after the final shot, there were two ladies on the 5th floor who went down the stairway to go down to the street, and they didn't see Oswald come by him. We know a police officer came up from the street after the last shot. He found Oswald sitting in the lunchroom having a Coke. And nobody could seem to duplicate someone getting up from the 6th floor, running down to the lunchroom in that amount of time. So it just seemed like it didn't work. There were more than a dozen people who were around the grassy knoll who said shots came from the grassy knoll. The Warren Commission report said, well, they were wrong. And that didn't seem very convincing. And then the thing that I really had a problem with was the single bullet theory, or the magic bullet theory, which was forwarded by Arlen Specter. Now, this is a drawing from the Warren Commission report, and it shows where the bullet would have had to enter at the base of Kennedy's neck in order to come out and strike John Connally. Now, the whole Warren Commission report is really based on this happening, on this being able to happen. But we know for a fact that one of the persons on the Warren Commission, future President Gerald Ford, admitted that he changed that autopsy evidence so the magic bullet theory would work. The bullet actually entered much lower on Kennedy's back. Ford stated he did so for clarity, whatever that is supposed to mean. But with that admission, he totally destroys the conclusions of the Warren Commission report. Something else I found, which is available online, you can listen to it, is a phone conversation President Johnson had with Senator Richard Russell. Russell was on the Warren Commission, and he didn't believe in the conclusions of it. He said this did not believe that the same bullet that hit Kennedy hit Connally. President Johnson said, I don't either. So you have two presidents of the United States who say they don't believe in the conclusions of the Warren Commission report. So there's something going on here. It's really hard to swallow. So at this time, I was sending out letters, and I mean letters, dozens and dozens and dozens of letters to people. Now, when a guy like me, who's just an average guy, sends a letter out to somebody important, you don't expect to get a response. I would expect either they'll just take the letter, throw it in the garbage, or they'll have their secretary send me a form letter saying, leave me alone, can't help you. Well, one of the persons I contacted was Gayton Fonzie. Gayton was on the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Now, if you if you've read his book, that's great. If you haven't, I think it's really the best book out there. It's called The Last Investigation. And Gayton talks about his part in investigating for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. He said everything started to fall apart when they began to investigate the CIA connections. He said there was a CIA agent found breaking into the assassination files in Congress. The person was found by security, arrested. When they approached the CIA and said, why is a CIA agent breaking into our files? The CIA said, gosh, we don't know. You think they would be more concerned. There was a tape recording made by a motorcycle policeman on the grassy knoll that indicated there were at least 4 shots. Now, that actual tape recording was given to some scientists to try and develop, and I actually was able to correspond with them and talk with one of them. And they said that the funding ran out for that investigation, but privately, they told me that they were convinced there were at least 4 shots, maybe 5, on that tape recording, which again totally destroys the conclusions of the Warren Commission. The House Select Committee on Assassinations told me that, told us all that there was a probable conspiracy. One of the more interesting things I found in speaking to Gayton Fonzie is that he found somebody down in Florida who he felt was a firsthand source on the assassination of President Kennedy. And when he revealed that to his superiors, that this person, could give us incredible information on what really happened with the assassination, he said a Treasury agent, this is an agent of the American government, showed up at his doorstep and took possession of that witness away from him. And he never saw the witness again. Again, very, very odd goings on. That's important. That will come up again later in my talk. So one of the first people I was able to get in touch with was a Texas businessman. I refer to him as Sam. That's not his real name. So we talked a few times on the phone. He told me there definitely was a conspiracy. He knew some of the people involved. Now, I worked in mental health for many years. And, frankly, a lot of the people who contacted me out of the blue, they weren't right in the head. And I tend to be very suspicious about anybody who tells me things like this. And that's how I treated the information that Sam was giving me. But then he told something that really made me angry. He told me that LBJ, the President Johnson, was responsible for Kennedy's assassination. Now, politicians, whether you like him or whether you don't, that's a heck of a thing to say about an American president. And that made me angry when he said that. He also told me something I'd never heard about. We had a United States Senator from Texas by the name of John Tower. Now, he was killed in a plane crash back in the 1980s. He had a history of, he had a lot of personal problems. And these came out when he was testifying to be the elder President Bush's Secretary of Defense. And he just crashed and burned in his investigation, and they refused to appoint him. And according to Sam, he was having a lot of reflections on his life and was thinking about coming forward with a lot of the things he knew that had gone on, including Johnson's connection to Kennedy's assassination. And according to Sam, Senator John Tower plane crash was murder. It wasn't an accident. Well, I thank Sam very much for all this information, and I set out to disprove everything he told me, because frankly, everything he told me was nuts. It was just nutty. Well, it took me about 10 minutes in the local library to find that there was indeed a newspaper article in the Dallas newspaper, buried, not on the front page, surprisingly, about LBJ's connection to the murder of President Kennedy. This was a gentleman by the name of Billy Saul Estes, who was a known felon, convicted criminal, who gave a very thorough and very detailed description of Johnson's connection, not just to Kennedy's murder, but to other murders that took place when President Johnson was a senator in Texas. So that was interesting. That caught my attention because that seemed to at least confirm some of what he told me. The article also said that there was a United States Marshal retired by the name of Clint Peoples. Clint Peoples said he believed the testimony that was given in front of the grand jury, and he made a public announcement that he was going to investigate. Shortly after that, Clint Peoples was found dead in a one-car accident on a lonely country road in Texas. I spoke with a mortician who was at Clint Peoples' funeral, and he said it appeared to him that Peoples' wrists had been bound prior to death. Now, I don't know much about that, but he said if you bound someone's hands when there's still blood flowing through them, the marks would be different than if the person is already dead. So he said it was clear to him that people's hands must have been bound at the time of the car crash. I thought that was really interesting and really pretty scary too. Well, I set out to disprove the information he had given me. And in the meantime, I was contacted by a gentleman who insisted that he remain anonymous. And, you know, I was always uncomfortable with this. I had many people who would talk to me only if I would agree to keeping the identity private. To me, that takes a lot away from it because, you know, you can make any claim that somebody told you something. There's no way to back it up. But anyway, this gentleman told me about a friend of his called Wally Engel. He said that back in the 1950s, Wally Engel worked for then Senator Lyndon Johnson. And Wally Engel confided in him that Johnson was involved in many illegal activities. When Johnson became vice president, was elected vice president in 1960, Engel said, I just can't be involved with this anymore. He quit his job and moved to California. Shortly after that, he was found dead with a gunshot wound. According to the newspaper, the gun was found, I don't remember now if it was the right hand or left hand, but the family said it was in the wrong hand. That's not the hand. He was right-handed, the gun was in his left hand. Lyndon Johnson appointed his cousin to travel from Texas to investigate. So they took the investigation away from local law authorities and they ruled it a suicide. The family did not believe he was suicidal. And as a matter of fact, his wife said he did not even have a gun. So again, that seemed really odd. So about that time, I heard back from a gentleman known as Colonel Fletcher Prouty. Now, Prouty, among other things, was the director of covert operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. If you've seen the movie JFK, he was portrayed in that movie by Donald Sutherland. To me, it's one of the most fascinating scenes in the movie. He's very helpful. He suggested that I check out the National Transportation and FAA files regarding Senator Tower's plane crash. And he said, look at how the media reports. So that was interesting because he pointed out to me that it had been revealed over the last many years that the CIA had many plants or many people working in the field of journalism, which I didn't know. And I looked into that and that was confirmed. That's absolutely right. And he also told me that there was something he called unspeakable power out there. And he asked me to be careful. I found him to be a very helpful man. I was just really more confused by anything by what he was saying. So I said, okay, well, we'll check out the plane crash. And I was really anxious to do that because I wanted to disprove everything I had been told about Senator Tower. So I went to the library again and got some newspaper articles, and the media was very clear. They said that Tower's plane had crashed due to engine failure. Well, at that point, I thought I had this mysterious caller because he said that Tower was murdered, but yet the media said the plane had crashed due to engine failure. So I followed up. I contacted the National Transportation Safety Board and was transferred to a few different people. So I'm talking to, eventually talking to a lady on the phone, long distance. I said, I want to look into this. Can you pull up the documents on this plane crash? And she said, sure, no problem. So I'm on the phone, but I can hear her clicking and typing on the keyboard. And she came up with, I guess, what she called a face page. And she said, there was no engine failure. The cause was listed as undetermined. So I said, well, you know, the papers all said there was engine failure. She said, well, no, that's not what is listed here. They were unable to determine the cause of the crash. I thought that was odd. So I said, well, I would like to get the name of the investigator and see the actual files. Can you call those up for me? And she said, no problem. So I'm on the phone. I hear her clicking away on the keyboard on the computer. And it's taken a long, long time. And I'm wondering what's going on. And finally, she comes back in and she says, well, that's really odd, but all those files have been deleted. I said, well, hey, I'm sure you have backup files. Can you access those? And she said, well, that's why it took me so long to get back on the phone to you. We make 2 backups of every file. I checked those. All of those have been deleted. I found that to be really odd and really suspicious. And it gave some credence to what this phone caller had told me. So at that point, I had written a letter to William Colby. Colby was the director of the CIA for a couple of years back in the 1970s. He was fired by then President Gerald Ford for cooperating too much with congressional investigation. I was stunned when he called. I was sitting in my office, picked up the phone. I thought it was one of my coworkers. He said, this is William Colby. You had sent me a letter. Let's talk about it. We talked quite a bit about the investigation, and we talked about Kennedy's death. And I think I built up kind of rapport. One of the benefits with working in mental health is you develop some psychological interviewing skills. Sometimes you can draw people out a little bit, and I tried to do that. And then Colby wound up doing something that really surprised me. He wound up apologizing to me. And he said, you know, people think that the director of the CIA is a powerful man, and he is. But there's some things he can't do. He said, I would love to have investigated the Kennedy assassination. But when I started to do that, there would immediately be leaks to the media. I would be demonized. I would be criticized publicly. I would have wound up getting fired immediately and not being able to do any of the things I wanted to do in my job. And I told him, you know, I understood that. He then did something that I thought was interesting. He was about to hang up the phone, and I said, well, sir, I did also want to ask you about Senator Tower's plane crash. And I reminded him of some of the things I said in my letter, and we talked about it. And I found him to be very interested in it. I had the impression that he was going to look into whatever contacts he had. He didn't share with me what contacts he had, but I'm sure a director of the CIA had some, and look into that crash himself. And then as we closed, he warned me that I should be careful about what I was doing and whose toes I was stepping on, which I thought was odd because, you know, if Oswald had killed the president and there was no conspiracy, who could I really be offending? Shortly after that, I was very surprised to find out that William Colby died quite unexpectedly. And if you've heard anything about that, you know that he apparently had prepared dinner. His wife was out of town. Looks like he had sat down to dinner. It looked like he didn't touch a bite. He got up and went for a canoe ride. There's a river out behind his house. And they found him several days later. And they said he must have died of a stroke and fell in the river or something. I found that very odd and the timing very unexpected. I waited several months to contact his wife, Sally Shelton, because I wanted to give her some time to grieve. And she was a very sweet lady. She called me and she said the only way she could be at peace was to believe that her husband had died naturally of natural causes. And I didn't want to push that at all. But again, I thought that was a very odd death, the timing of it. Well, as I continued my investigation, I had heard from a number of people that there was a connection between the Watergate burglars and the assassination of President Kennedy. Just a little background on this. This is kind of complicated. But there was a claim by Nixon's chief of staff, Bob Haldeman, who many people consider to be the second most powerful person in the country, that when the Watergate burglars were arrested, the reason that Nixon wanted to stall the investigation was he did not want it to come out that there was a connection between some of the Watergate burglars and the Kennedy investigation. He had told his chief of staff, Robert Haldeman, to meet with the CIA director, who at the time, this was Richard Helms, and tell him to get involved in trying to stop the investigation of the Watergate burglary. He said, just tell Richard Helms, this will bring up the whole Bay of Pigs thing. Well, Haldeman didn't know what that meant, but he did what he was told. He told CIA Director Richard Helms, the president says this will bring up the whole Bay of Pigs thing. According to Robert Haldeman, Helms absolutely lost his mind when he said that code word and started screaming and shouting. Haldeman claims he later found out that Bay of Pigs referred to the people involved, the Cubans involved in the Watergate burglary, who were also involved in the Kennedy assassination. I was told that the missing, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there's a famous missing 18 minutes of tape from President Nixon's office. If you play the tape recording, they're talking about different things, and then all of a sudden the tape goes blank, and 18 minutes later, you can hear voices again. I was told that there were copies made of all the tapes recorded in the president's office, and that a copy of that tape still exists. I was led to believe one of the Nixon daughters has a copy of that tape. So I sent both Julie Eisenhower and Tricia Nixon Cox letters, and I was real frank. I said, I'm not looking to badmouth your father. I respect that he was president of the United States, but if you have those tapes, I would sure appreciate you sharing them. You don't have to give them to me. You can just go public. I never heard back from Julie Eisenhower, but interestingly enough, I got a letter from Tricia Cox, and it was actually handwritten to my address. I still have it if anyone ever wants to see it. I bring it usually when I go to these talks. And I said, well, here's the envelope, and here's what was in it, nothing. For some reason, she sent me an envelope, empty envelope, in response to my request. And I can think of several different reasons why you would do something like that. Frankly, don't know why she did it. But I'm still hopeful something will happen there. Because supposedly on those 18 minutes of tape that she has, Nixon talks about the connection between the Watergate burglars and the Kennedy assassination. If I ever were able to get something like that, again, I'm not in this for the money. I'm not going to charge anybody for it. I'd put it on the internet where everybody could listen to it. Because all I'm really interested in finding out what really happened and letting people know what happened. Well, at that point, I had a lot of information. I'd gotten a lot of feedback from people. I hadn't yet written a letter to Richard Helms. He was one of the longest serving directors of the CIA. So I sent him a letter, and at this point, I kind of expected to get an answer because a lot of the stuff I included in his letter was the things we just discussed. So 3 days after I sent Mr. Helms a letter, I came back from a meeting, sat down in my office. I had a voicemail, and the voicemail was from Mr. Helms. I made a copy of that, so I still have that, so I can prove he actually did contact me. And it was kind of cool because he gave me his private number. And when I called, I got his secretary and she said, Mr. Helms is expecting your call. Okay. So she transferred me. He picked up the phone. I said, this is Jim Koepke calling. And without even starting with any pleasantries, he started yelling at me and yelling and yelling. And he just really went at it. He was very angry at me. He said, you have no business looking into this assassination. You have no business talking to these people. You need to stay out of this. And he went on and on. Now, one of the benefits I had with talking to him is, again, I had some training in mental health interviewing. And I realized if I started entering into an argument with him, there'd just be more shouting and he'd wind up slamming the phone down. We wouldn't get anywhere. So I let him go on and on. When he talked to me, he was in his 80s. And I could tell he was running out of steam. He was running out of energy. So I just let him go. And then when he started to take a breath, I started talking to him, and I started talking to him gently and, saying, complimenting him, saying, a man in your position, you were so important, and those kinds of things to try and get on his good side. And I brought the conversation over to the Watergate burglars. And I said, Mr. Helms, I've heard from people who know that some of the Watergate burglars were involved in the Kennedy assassination and that there was a conspiracy. And then I wound it up by saying, and there were some people with the CIA, probably rogue people, so I did not involve him, who were also involved in a conspiracy to assassinate Kennedy. And he had this huge sigh. He was just like he was giving up. And he said, yes, that's true. It's all true. And I just about fell out of my chair. Now, as much as I wanted to take that and run with it, I had to give him a chance. I had to give him a chance to take it back. He didn't seem like the kind of guy who would make a joke or say something to mislead me. Mr. Helms, do you realize what you just said? There was a conspiracy to assassinate Kennedy. He said, yes, that's correct. He didn't take it back. He confirmed it. Now, if my neighbor says he thinks there was a conspiracy to assassinate Kennedy, that's great, but it doesn't mean anything. But this is someone who was a director of the CIA. That meant a lot to me. He then seemed to catch his breath and threatened me. He said, I'm going to tell you again, you need to drop this investigation right now. Do you understand? I took that as a very thinly veiled threat. And I said, well, sir, I understand what you're saying, but I'm not going to stop my investigation. He said goodbye and hung up. Now, a little over a week after that, I was thinking about everything that happened, and I got a letter. It was postmarked from an Air Force base in Japan. I don't know anybody in the Air Force. I don't know anybody in Japan. I opened the letter and it said, you're being wiretapped. It's kind of weird. And we had all noticed, everyone in my family had noticed that there were some strange noises sometimes when you picked up the phone the last few days. And it seemed to be causing some interference in the conversation. So I contacted the local phone company and said, there's something wrong with my phone. Now, I don't know about how things are in England, but here in the United States, when you have problems with your phone, it takes a week or more to get someone to come. So I made an appointment a week out. I knew I'd have to take time off from work, but that's fine. So I made the appointment, and then I sat down in my chair and started watching television. And then shortly after that, I noticed a white van pulling up in front of my house. Now, the telephone pole for my house is right off of my garage. And this guy gets out, climbs up the phone pole, and he's up there just for a minute or two, and he comes down, gets in his van, and pulls away. And I thought, wow, that's service. So I went and checked my phone, and after that, my phone was okay. So I don't know what happened, but I thought that was real strange, and it seemed to happen right after my talk with Mr. Helms. So again, I thought that was very odd. So now at this point, I pretty much contacted everybody I can contact. I feel I'm pretty much done with my investigation. And I was pretty much ready to put it to rest. But this is where everything took a real dark turn. And, you know, sometimes I get emotional when I talk about what happened, but we're going to talk about something that was very unexpected. So, quite a while after this, I was reading the newspaper one morning before work. It's a newspaper in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's called the Star Tribune. And there was an article in it. And whoever wrote it made the case that anybody who believed in the Kennedy assassination was stupid. And I thought, well, you know, that's really blunt. And since most people, surveys show, believe there was a conspiracy to assassinate Kennedy, I thought you insulted a lot of people by saying that. And, you know, I was so upset by that when I got to work, I made a phone call to the editor of the Star Tribune. Very nice lady. And I talked with her. I said, you know, that was really kind of an insulting thing to say. And she said, you know, you're right. And I'm sorry I ran that article. And she said, I'll tell you what, if you want to write a letter rebuting it, I'll print it. Well, fine. So I wrote a letter. Now, where I worked is only 2 blocks away from where the Star Tribune was. So I just walked it over there on my noon hour. And a couple days later, it appeared in the Star Tribune. I figured, well, that's that. And that was the start of something that I never could have imagined happened. The day that the letter appeared in the Star Tribune, I had to take my son to a basketball game. Came home at night. My daughter says, a man called. He wanted to talk to you about that letter you wrote. I said, well, I'll call him back. What did he want? And she said he wouldn't talk to me, and he said he would not leave his number. Okay, I guess he didn't want to talk to me too bad. So the next day, I took my daughter to something. I came home, my wife said, a man called. He says he called the night before, and he wouldn't leave his number, but he wants to talk to you about that letter. And this went on for a couple of days. I was always out of the house. Finally, this guy really wanted to talk to me. I was home, and the guy called. And he told me the most incredible story. He said that he had a very good friend who was a treasury agent, or what we call an ATF agent, who lived and worked here in Minnesota. And he said they were very close, and each of them went through a divorce, and they would share things with each other, and they would go on fishing trips, those kinds of things. And he said sometimes when they would go on these trips together, this gentleman, whose name he said was Mike Hall, would share some things about his work in the past, things that really bothered him. And, you know, if we have a close friend and you've had some traumatic things in your life, you'll share them with a close friend sometimes. And he said one of the things he shared with them was that the Kennedy assassination had nothing to do with Lee Harvey Oswald. He said it was a conspiracy. He said the CIA was involved, some people from the mafia were involved, and he said the CIA really did its best work. The actual assassination was a little sloppy, but the cover-up was superb. He said the word he used was the CIA had done its best work with the cover-up. Well, that was all very interesting, and he told me a lot of other things. And I said, well, you know, can I meet with you? Can I talk more about this? And he said, no, there's no way I'm going to give you my name. There's no way I'm going to give you my number. You're never going to hear from me again. And he hung up. Well, what do you do with that kind of information? So I let it sit a couple of days. You know, the guy sounded sincere. He didn't sound like he was crazy. And I was actually, frankly, considering just forgetting all about it, but I was curious. So I called the ATF office here in Minnesota, And actually, all I wanted to do was verify that there was such a person as Mike Hall, that he even existed. So I called and I spoke with a secretary, receptionist, and I said, I want to verify that this person used to work here, Mike Hall. And she said, well, I'm new. I don't know. We don't even have a personnel office here, but there's an agent who's been here forever. That's the term she used. If anyone would know him, it'd be this guy. So she connected me up with him. So he answered the phone, and, I'm sure he gets all kinds of crazy phone calls all the time. So I wanted to keep it brief. So I just said, I'm just looking to see if you knew of a man named Mike Hall who used to work here. And the agent said, Mike, sure, he was my boss. He was a great boss. Worked here for many years. He's retired now. I said, wow, okay. Do you know where I can get a hold of him? He says, I don't. He kind of wanted to get off the grid, but he gave me the name of Mike's best friend who was still involved in the federal government. He said, you find this guy, you'll find Mike Hall. He'll be able to tell you where Mike is. I said, okay, well, that's as much as I was hoping for. And then the guy said, wait a minute, why do you want to find Mike? I said, oh boy, he's going to think I'm nuts. So I told him the whole story. He said, yeah, I know all about that. I said, you what? He said, Mike told me about the involvement of the CIA in the conspiracy once, and I wrote it all down. I documented it. I have the document locked in my desk right here. I said, you got to be kidding me. He said, okay. Well, I thanked him very much, of course. And I set out to find Mike Hall. While I was doing this, I realized that the person I had mentioned at the beginning of our talk, Gayton Fonzie, had mentioned in his book that a Treasury agent from Minnesota had come down and spirited away a witness. And I thought, that's got to be the same guy. So I contacted Gayton. And I said, this is what's happened to me. You didn't name the guy in your book, but was his name Mike Hall? And Gayton said that was the guy. And I tell you, it was just like the light bulb went on. It was like, wow, this confirms in different sources that this happened. I knew at that point there had to be a conspiracy because there was too many different people saying the same thing here from different sources. I did everything I could. Now, by this time, I had done a lot of research. I'd contacted a lot of people. I thought I was pretty good at finding people, but Mike Hall was really, really off the grid. I did everything I could to contact him. I contacted everyone I could. I couldn't. So I set out to find this alleged best friend of Mike Hall. I figured out where he worked at a federal agency in Georgia, the state of Georgia, which at one time had been something called the School of the Americas, which did not have a good reputation. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but they were accused of doing a whole lot of bad things. Anyway, that's where this person apparently worked. So I started calling that federal facility. Called them a number of times, tried a lot of different ways to try and get a hold of them. Just totally hit the wall. They wouldn't even tell me if he worked there. I sent letters explaining what I wanted to do. No response, nothing. This went on for a long time. I really, really was obsessed with finding Mike Hall and with getting hold of this friend of Mike Hall because I knew he could connect me. Well, at the time, there was something in the United States that the Congress has enacted called the Assassination Records Research Review Board. And this was because of the movie JFK that Congress was kind of forced to try and find all the information out there about the Kennedy assassination. Now, I remember that Gayton Fonzie had said that when they were investigating the Kennedy assassination, a CIA agent broke into their vault and went through their files. And we all know there have been many mysterious deaths connected with the Kennedy assassination. So the last thing I wanted to do was do something that would, get someone hurt. So I spent a lot of time thinking about whether or not I wanted to do this. And I kept trying to get a hold of Mike and this best friend of his. And finally, I gave up. I said, well, I'm going to contact this records review board that Congress started. and talk with someone there. So I talked with the assistant director there on the phone. And I told him the information I had. I did not give him the name, but I said, you realize we have someone who held a very important position in the federal government. This is not a nutcase. This is someone who was a bureau chief in the Treasury Department. And he could apparently has firsthand information about conspiracy and the assassination of Kennedy. The guy said, we have to talk to this guy. We have subpoena power. We have money. We have investigators. You tell me who he is. We'll find him. We'll subpoena him. We'll interview him. I figured, this is awesome. We are going to find out what happened in the investigation of Kennedy. So I told him Mike Hall's name. I gave him all the information I had about him. The guy said, I guarantee you we'll look into it. You did the right thing. So about a week later, I was in my office at my desk, and I got a phone call from a lady. And she said, I am the wife of this best friend of Mike Hall that you've been trying to get a hold of for so long. He knows about the phone calls. He's read your letters, and he didn't want to get in touch with you. But he wanted me to give you a call today to see if you're the son of a bitch who got Mike Hall killed. Well, I almost fell off my chair. So I said, what happened? And she said, Mike told his wife he was going out for a walk and never came back. They found him alone, face down out in the woods, dead. Coroner said, well, he must have had a heart attack. He was in his early 50s, in great shape. And I can't tell you how devastated I was by this, not just by his death, but by the possibility that I had anything to do with it. I contacted a doctor, a well-known forensic specialist named Cyril Wecht. If you've studied the Kennedy assassination, you've probably heard the name Cyril Wecht. And he was very nice to talk to me about this. And, he had some valid points. He said, well, guys in their 50s who look like they're in good shape fall over dead of heart attacks every day. Could have happened. The issue here is the timing. It happened when he was alone. It happened right after you gave this information about what he knew and what his name was. So that's something that I've had to live with since then. So I continued my investigation, and I used something called the FOIA, or the Freedom of Information Act, to pursue these further connections I had to Lyndon Johnson. So I sent Freedom of Information Acts to everybody looking for information about Johnson and the Kennedy assassination. And it took years to get it back. When I finally got back what I was looking for, I got back a huge stack of papers. And it was pretty mundane stuff, nothing. And right in the middle of it, I found a document here. This is the face sheet. It was from the director at the time, J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI. And what it was a document. The FBI had a mole or a spy in the KGB. And according to the document, this spy had always provided correct information as what was going on in the KGB, had provided this information to the FBI. And according to the spy, I don't know how well you can see on your screen, it said the KGB was in possession of documents proving that President Lyndon Johnson was responsible for the assassination of the late President John F. Kennedy. Well, again, this is a pretty convincing document to me. And this was 20 years ago. And I've spent the last 20 years trying to get my hands on that evidence that the KGB supposedly has. Now, what I've been able to narrow down is the KGB has two sets of files. There are the general files, which are open and which you can request information from. And there are the closed files, the top secret files, which I've been told this is probably a part of. I've talked with people at the Washington Embassy. I've talked with people at the UN. People at the UN, I talked with a diplomat there from Russia who was very helpful, tried to be helpful anyway, gave me some ideas of how to get this information out. I visited the Russian consul in Seattle when I was there. And people at a certain level are very sympathetic and they're trying to be helpful, but they don't have the power to actually release those documents. I've written more letters than I can think of to Putin and the people in his cabinet. And that's where the investigation sits. I think that there do exist two smoking guns on the assassination. This document in the KGB and that Watergate tape I referenced. And that's just something I continue to do. I figure maybe I can somehow sneakily get in to those files somehow and get that information from someone somehow. If I ever do again, it's not something I'm going to put in a book and sell. It's something I'll put on the internet where everybody can see it, because I think this is, especially if you're an American, this is our country. We deserve to see this information. So that's pretty much all I had. I'm interested in whatever comments or questions you all might have.
That's great, Jim. Thank you so much for that. That's a terrific presentation. And I'm sure there's a lot of questions. I mean, there is some things in the chat box. Unfortunately, I can't see them because I'm too far away from my screen. So I'm going to ask if people have any questions. Do you want to unmute yourself and please just ask Jim directly?
Joseph was questioning what evidence.
Yeah, there's a question from Joseph just about what evidence you have to back up any of these claims. I mean, Joseph, I'm not sure whether you want to just unmute and just clarify what claims you're talking about there.
Well, a lot of them. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Go ahead, Joseph.
I find it hard to believe that two former directors of the CIA would call you up on the phone.
Would you like to hear a recording?
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of technical skills. Let's try this.
Oh, we can't hear it.
Let's see. I don't think it's started from the beginning. Yeah, there. I don't know if you heard that, but he identifies himself as Richard Helms. And when I would send these letters, I didn't want anyone to play a practical joke. So I'm the only one who knew I sent those letters. So it's not like anybody else would have known about it. And if you've heard Helms talk, that's his voice. As far as the evidence about the KGB information, when I had the PowerPoint up, I had the document on that, and you can look at it. In the last, I'm not sure when, maybe the last couple of years, it came out that someone else got a hold of that same information and has put it out there. So it's out on the internet if you want to take a look at it, the document from the KGB. The information from Senator Russell saying he didn't believe the conclusions, and President Johnson saying he didn't believe either. That's also, you can Google that conversation. It's about a 20-minute conversation. And
yeah, I'm aware of the conversation.
Pardon me?
I'm aware of the conversation. Oh, okay. It's in Michael Beschloss's book.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jim, can you see the chat area?
No.
Okay.
Let me see here. Oh, okay, here it is. I'm sorry. Like I said, I don't have a lot of skills.
No, that's good. That's fine.
Okay,
Some of the characters.
don't,
So can you read the questions?
all I can see is he does have a tape of his answering machine. I can't,
From the CIA, Dr. Helms, obviously
you're
not
right.
proof.
Not
Obviously
proof, but worth
proof,
something when
but-
Jim put his ad
yeah,
in Messenger.
yeah.
Yeah, I see all that. Yep.
Okay. That's it. Okay.
Jim,
That's all I have.
That's okay. That's all I can see as well. That's fine. That's
Okay,
all-
okay.
That's the only question I've got on the chat area.
Jim, this is Gary Severson.
Hey, Gary.
By the way, I've been interacting with Jim for 20 plus years over this, and this story hasn't changed. So usually that's an indication that somebody isn't grifting. We know people that grift and they change their story every minute. But Jim, I'd like to refer to chapter 9, Deep Throat.
Yes.
Do you still think that the guy in the White House that self-identified as I think you would say, as Deep Throat is the actual Deep Throat and not the number 2 man at the FBI?
No, I think it was a compilation of people. I mean, I only, Woodward and Bernstein be able to answer that, but I think that they combined it. There was, there's just so much funny stuff going on there. I never got that involved with it, but I spoke with a couple people in the Nixon White House, and they all pretty much say the same thing. I just think that tape does still exist, because I spoke with enough people about it that, again, they weren't trying to sell me anything. But apparently that was standard procedure to make to have a copy of the tape. So I don't know. I mean, it would have been easy enough for Trisha Cox to send me a letter saying, I don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy. Leave me alone. And or just say no. The fact that she sent me the envelope kind of acknowledged that she got my question, I guess. But again, I don't really know what to make of it. I think it would shed a lot of light on a lot of things if that, but I understand where she's coming from too. I mean, her kids, you don't want to tell your kids, oh, by the way, your grandfather, well, everyone hates him. And besides that, he also covered up the assassination of American presidents. So I'm not angry with her. I think I understand where she's coming from. Maybe when she passes, hopefully not for a long time, maybe the tapes will come out. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't like to speculate.
Can you divulge the name of the guy in the White House now?
I don't think so. I haven't really checked if he's still around or not, but I can't. But one of the things I hated doing is all this stuff where someone says, yeah, I'll talk to you, but you can't say who I am. And it sounds so mysterious. And it sounds like, well, they're maybe playing me a little bit, but it sounds like I'm playing a game here too. And I can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, he could be part of the composite that Woodward and Bernstein eventually said that they.
I suspect.
I've spoken briefly to both Woodward and Bernstein here in Minneapolis on occasion, and I don't think they can be trusted as far as you can throw them either, based on their answers to questions I asked them about.
Really?
For example, I said to Woodward, you were you actually admitted that you were a courier
Yeah.
between the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the
CIA.
general at the
Oh.
executive office building that was implicated in doing some shenanigans as far as Watergate. I can't remember his name now.
Hmm.
But I said that. I was standing toe to toe to Woodward, and I said, is it true that you were CIA? Or, excuse me, naval intelligence?
Hmm.
And he took a half a step back and he said, that was disproven a long time ago.
Oh.
And I was about ready to go for the jugular. And at that moment, Mark Dayton, who was a U.S. Senator from Minnesota, comes up to us all excited about meeting Woodward, and that ended it. But Woodward proceeded to go up on the stage and tried to signal my union teacher reps to throw me out because he was afraid that I was going to ask him questions after his talk to the teachers union. Well, I wasn't going to do that. But at any rate, he was, his speech given to a bunch of like 1,000 teachers in the room was about the correctness of the foreign policy in Vietnam.
Oh.
And, he was setting himself up to get attacked, and he probably anticipated that I would. But anyway, the fact that he would deny that he was naval intelligence when he had admitted it to other investigators just made me think that this guy and his, there's the whole theory that Nixon was framed by the ultra right to in effect assassinate his character, and not because they couldn't assassinate him physically.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Woodward had that history with Casey, another CIA director, and they just seemed so incredibly close for someone who's supposed to be a independent journalist, that I always thought that was, odd.
Yeah.
For a journalist to be that close to a director of the CIA. I don't know.
Jim, can I ask a question? Do you have a website? Would you make the transcripts of your interviews available, or do you have recordings that you could make available?
No, I don't have a website. I know a lot of people go into this with the idea of writing a book, but I just, the book I have, I just put together because someone said to me, you have to get this information out there. And that's why I did that. But I was really just doing this for my own interest. So I've never put, it is kind of interesting because last year, my wife and I were looking for something to do because we're kind of shut down because of COVID. Started cleaning out our house, and I was finding all sorts of stuff. I had stashed a letter here and a document there. So yeah, don't look at me as someone who's a professional investigator, because I don't have a website or anything like that.
Would you make the stuff available?
Yeah, whatever I have, I'll make available.
I just get the impression now that the research community is becoming much more open.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of researchers working together, and it's much more collaborative than I think it used to be.
Yeah.
Jim, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm on there as MRHI. It's the name is Ian Hughes. Yeah, great talk, and the information is amazing. The question I've got for you, because today is the anniversary of 9/11, obviously 20th
Right.
year now, and I'm hearing the same wall of denial, from the various governments and everybody else, about conspiracy theories, blah, blah. And to me, it's the same with the Kennedy assassination. I've been investigating, I'm 62 now, and I've been investigating this since I was about 16. And do you think we're getting any closer to any sort of mainstream acknowledgement, that there was a conspiracy based on the evidence that people like you and everybody else has collected? I heard Oliver Stone's making a new documentary, or he's made one, or he's releasing one, so on and so on. But there's always this wall of denial and the sticking to the official story, which gets more and more implausible as the years go by, but they still stick to it. Do you think there's any chance that, the truth really, or the facts anyway, will come out?
Well, I think hopefully the truth and the facts might come out. I think if it does, it'll be discredited. The media, my opinion, the media gave up any integrity they have back in the 60s when there were so many strange things happening with the investigation, and they pretty much ignored it. Jim Garrison's investigation, whether, he had a lot of problems, I know, but the way they just viciously attacked Garrison in the media, it just wasn't right. And hey, if I came out tomorrow, because with those documents I referred to, if the Russian government were to give me those documents tomorrow, I think I can guarantee you that many newspapers would say, oh, he's crazy, he made those documents up, or the Russian government is trying to trick us, or, they would do whatever they could to discredit it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you've confirmed really, because I was living in South Korea 20 years ago when 9/11 happened, and I just saw the way the media was being manipulated then, and it seemed to just mirror what happened with the Kennedy assassination. And today just made me think, how far have we actually come? But I got to say, I really admire you for keeping on, and please keep it all up.
Oh, thank you. I will.
Cheers.
Yeah, well said. And I think we all kind of think that. I think what's coming across to me is the people that seem to do this research, yourself included, are targeted.
Yeah. I think they kind of encourage people who are not right mentally to come out with stuff, because then they can say, well, anyone who believes there a conspiracy is crazy.
Yeah.
And, they put everybody in that same box, even if you are a legitimate researcher, and even if you have come up with some legitimate information.
Yeah.
So you're putting your reputation at risk when you do this, but hey, at my age, what do I care? So.
Okay. Are there any other questions that people want to raise or discussion points?
Yeah, Jim, interested about the John Tower plane crash, or whatever it was. Have you ever looked at JFK Jr.'s disappearance?
Well, I haven't really looked into it. I used to be really naive, and now I'm probably too much the other way. I'm very suspicious. It just seemed odd to me that when I remember watching the news, I don't know what, it was a major network after the plane crash, and they were just so quick to jump on it and say, oh, this kind of thing happens all the time. It's nothing unusual about plane. It just seemed to be too much to me. And so I don't know. I really don't know.
Would I be able to contact you by email?
Sure.
And sure, is that possible? Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I'll do it via Tony. I can give you my email to Tony and pass it on to you maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, great. Thanks,
Well,
Tony.
thank you. Thank you for having me on. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jim. And,
Thank you.
a really interesting discussion. Thank you so much. And thanks for all that you're doing, to bring the research forward. So brilliant. I'm just going to stop recording, but please feel free to hang on.
Tony,
Yes.
did I ask Jim, is he still there?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm here. I'm
Still
here.
there. Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
Jim, you have a chapter 8 on Tunheim, Judge Tunheim,
Oh, yeah.
the ARB. And, it's about 10 pages, I guess, but I was at the
Right.
talk, of course, with you back
Yeah.
in, I don't know, 2002 or something.
Yeah.
And so because we're in Minneapolis, we've had access to him. But I think what you distilled in your notes in those 8-10 pages about what he said to us, is a group of about 30, I think,
Yeah.
is probably an example of the most visible comments that he made about a conspiracy. Because he, when he's interviewed in public, whether it's, for a local TV station or radio, he really plays it close to the vest. I mean, it's
Yes. Yeah.
like, I'm a lawyer, I need evidence, which is fine. But then when you get him in private, it's a lot different.
Yeah.
In private was kind of this group of 30 people we had 17, 18 years ago. And he let his hair down a little bit. And,
Yeah.
he says things in there about his sense that it was obviously a conspiracy. He told me that the key to getting to the bottom of it is the tape recordings from Mexico City.
Oh, okay.
Aren't available, but he says somebody has them. And so that could very well be his behind the scenes focus. So again, he says things in private that make him sound like one of us conspiracy investigators.
Yes. Yes. Interesting.
Yeah. He gets a bad, because of his public persona, investigators, are ready to criticize him and shoot him down totally as one of the conspirators of the cover-up. But when he talks the way he did in the notes that you produced in your book, you get a totally different picture.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, so Jim, so I went to the loo, so I don't know if this question was asked, but so having researched this for God knows how many years, and I haven't read your book, but are you an LBJ did it guy or CIA did it guy? What's your sort of overriding conclusions? And you mentioned the Cubans, of course.
Yeah, no,
Watergate. So did you see the Cubans as the executors of it rather than higher level?
Yeah, I am an LBJ did it guy. I've seen too much from too many different sources. It seems clear to me that he was involved in some nefarious stuff back when he was a United States Senator. Somebody, Barry Goldwater, once said, Barry Goldwater was a United States Senator, said that it's amazing how much money Lyndon Johnson, or how wealthy Lyndon Johnson got while he was president, or something like that. There's just too much out there. And I think it was probably coordinated by somebody maybe who was, let's say, a rogue CIA agent or someone in the military. And I think they probably used their resources. The resources included the Cubans, mafia to some extent. But I think, to me, the thing based on this, regardless of who did it, who had the power to cover it up, only the President of the United States had the power to cover it up, and that was Johnson.
And if he was behind, if he was behind it. Do you think he did it for his own nefarious reasons, either financially or politically, or to stop the investigations, potentially going to jail? Or do you think he did it because he was influenced by, say, the military-industrial complex, and it was a kind of a Texas thing, and the Vietnam issue is obviously very relevant there?
Well, I've heard, and you've probably heard this too, that Johnson was in a lot of political trouble.
Mhm, yeah.
Kennedy had told people that he was not going to be on the ticket in 1964 for the re-election. And also, I don't remember who it was, but someone had mentioned to Jack Kennedy that there may be some criminal investigations going on related to Johnson. And Kennedy said he wasn't going to get in the way of those. And I think Johnson knew this. I think Johnson knew he was going to be in a lot of not just political trouble, but also some legal trouble, criminal legal trouble. And I don't know. I mean, my experience is people in Washington know what's going on. And maybe somebody approached Johnson, maybe he approached somebody. Kennedy didn't have a lot of friends in the intelligence agencies. He had threatened to destroy the CIA. A lot of people in the military were very angry with him over the whole, Bay of Pigs thing, not invading Cuba. So I think there were a lot of people who, Johnson realized would be glad to get rid of Kennedy. And what he was doing, what he and Bobby were doing to the mafia, he was destroying the mafia. So I think there's no shortage of people who would have been willing to step up and help out with the assassination.
Do you think that meeting occurred the night before? Was it the night before?
Yeah.
Are you a believer that big
place,
that big powwow occurred the night before?
I don't know for sure if it did, but it certainly sounds believable to me that it did. I mean, I think his mistress was there, and she said that it occurred, and also said that Johnson said something like, "Those Kennedys will never bother me again after tomorrow."
So said Madeleine Brown, but
Madeleine
she also changed her story quite a lot. Different versions of it, different people's in attendance. Murchison Senior wasn't in Dallas at that time. Mac Wallace was the shooter behind the grassy knoll. I don't believe Madeleine Brown.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, Mac Wallace may have been involved in some murders and some nefarious stuff, but if I was going to do it, I would want a professional assassin making that shot, because if you miss, I mean, they would have hung Johnson. Bobby would have, if Jack still would have been alive, Bobby would have made sure we got to the bottom of it, and they would have hung Johnson for treason, and Johnson knew that. So you would have put somebody really, really good in the position of making those shots.
Yeah, Mac Wallace was in California at the time. He wasn't in Dallas either. And neither was his fingerprints on the 6th floor of the book depository, as was testified by Nathan Darby and some other guy, Hoffmeister, I think his name was. They identified the National Archives fingerprints linked to Mac Wallace, but they used inferior copies that held in Austin, Texas or something, and all that has since been refuted.
So, Peter, you're not a fan of the men on the 6th floor, then?
There wasn't a man on the 6th floor. There was about
the
2 or
book.
3.
The book, the men on the 6th floor.
Yeah. Well, you can't go anywhere with that sort of stuff. You just primary evidence. There were plenty of people who testified that there were 3 people with a rifle with a scope on it on the 6th floor. It certainly wasn't Oswald. And, you know, and one guy, dark jacket, horn rimmed glasses. And so everybody said, oh, that's Mac Wallace, you know, and linking that in with Carr's testimony that of the guy coming out the back of the Texas Book Depository and walking along Houston Street and all this. Oh, that's Mac Wallace. Well, you know, we don't know. End of story. We know it wasn't Wallace anyway, but he was definitely a murderer, and he was linked. But you know, he killed Kinser back in 1952, and if he was involved with the killing of Henry Marshall, the photo fit looks like him, but that's, you know, then people, you know, is that on a directive from LBJ, bump this guy off for us, because he's, you know, and all that comes from Billy Celestes, as Jim has touched on in his talk. But you know, it's very weak in a court of law. There's no proof. I rest my case, Ron.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot, Pete. Jim, thank you so much for meeting us today. It's been
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Great, I'm glad you did. And a round of applause.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And on this one, I'm going to pause the recording here. But again, Jim, you're a legend. Thank you so much.